Okay. I have a silly nonsense topic. Since
Okay.
we've been talking about all this heavy stuff and it's kind of a heavy day.
Yeah.
This may end up in our Patreon. Oh God. I need a vacation. Oh, I know what it is. So this is something I have been accused of before in my life by numerous people. And I'm just wondering if you find yourself, one, ever doing this, or two, being on the receiving end of something like this. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
All right. And it's not that big a deal, but a lot of it comes down to people wanting to control me, which I get. We all want to control each other. Some people do it more often.
Mm-hmm.
I have been known to say things for shock value, which is funny because I can't stand Howard Stern. But I have been known to say things for shock value, although the things that I say are not made up.
Right, of course.
I mean, they're true. When I say, oh, I met a guy on an elevator and I had sex with him, I really did meet a guy on an elevator and then I had sex with him.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it was in the building in Phoenix where we worked.
I remember.
Yeah.
I totally remember, and I remember who it was.
I sort of do. We'll talk about his name later because I don't remember his name. And that's, again, there's another shock value thing, right? Like, I don't know his name. I know he was married.
Yes, I remember that.
That's how the conversation got started. As a matter of fact, a girl was getting off the elevator and she said, let me know when you get a divorce and we'll go out. And then the doors closed. And I said, I wouldn't wait till you were divorced. And he looked at me and he's like, why not? And I go, are you planning on getting a divorce? And he said, no. And then I said, well, then why wait? And that was literally the extent of the conversation. Next thing I know, he's coming over to my house.
I actually even remember where he came from to your house.
Oh, really? I don't. And there you go. So, but that story can be a shock value story. And
Sure.
I whip things out and I admit it. I did it for multiple reasons. All of them psychological, right? Like all of them because, and it wasn't the attention per se. Like, I definitely don't need any extra attention. I already feel like I stick out like a sore thumb and that, but I did it to exert my independence. And I think a lot of me did it so people wouldn't feel sorry for me, right? And I'm like, why would you feel sorry for me? I fucked a guy in an elevator. Well, actually, we weren't in the elevator.
And you met in the elevator.
Yeah. Like it was literally a 7-second conversation. When people say, is it easy to get laid as a girl? It took me 7 seconds. So yeah. Right. And so even now, I think that's why I cuss a lot, as a matter of fact, is it shocks people, right? It can shock people, especially when you're in church.
Yeah.
Sends people off the deep end.
Well, and I think too, it's partly engagement, right? Because a lot of the time it's not even like, even as you're talking, sometimes I think it's not necessarily shock as much as it's like, people are like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Like it's engaging in a different conversation than the fucking weather.
Yeah.
But it almost kind of even goes back to, like, in my opinion, what we were talking about earlier of the people that kind of skew those stereotypes, because people probably put you, or at least maybe even in your mind, people put you in this box and you're kind of like, yeah, no, I don't fit your stereotype of who I am.
That's true. That's it is 100% true. I definitely am aware that I fall into a stereotype based on, looks. Sure.
Everybody does.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I don't dislike that stereotype. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that stereotype, right?
I mean, I think that's a problem, is the majority of stereotypes, when we think of them, actually have negative connotations. Like, what stereotype is out there that you're like, yeah, I want to be that stereotype?
Right. Although I mean, an Instagram influencer is a new stereotype, isn't it? Because it's a very specific type of person. Mostly. I've seen others. Maybe, yeah. But, and I think that's maybe why that word is such an interesting word. But those people, you know, they say things like, I noticed, I don't know who this guy is. I've only seen a couple of his reels, and he replays stuff that he saw on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, in a little corner, in this little corner of his screen, and then there's him reacting to it, and then he reenacts it, right? And there's a bunch of people that do this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a whole lifestyle for this guy. That's his job. And now it's his lifestyle. And then, but I wonder, is that who he really is? Like, it's just a character he's playing, right? And
Well,
it's
that's one
shock
reason.
value.
Well, and that's one reason. I mean, when you think about some of these influencers, I mean, some of them are killing themselves. Like, there's been a problem with that. And I think it's because they are living this unauthentic life, right? Like, they're constantly having to come up with ways to put themselves out there and look a certain way and feel a certain way all the fucking time. And that has to be exhausting.
Yeah, I agree. And that's we were doing that same thing. We just weren't doing it on an international platform, right? And I mean, I was doing it in a bar in Phoenix, right? And I was on that stage. Sure.
But I also think, and I mean, even what you just mentioned about it being psychological, right? I do think, and I'm not saying this about you, I'm just saying,
no,
like,
it's about me.
In general, like, that was about me. I'm making it a generality, and I think and I'm making a judgment, right? Or just an assumption, I guess, an assumption. I think for a lot of people who maybe do shock, or their version of what shock is, who maybe are also influencers who have this general persona, have very potentially low self-esteem.
Yeah.
They're having to get gratification or get, like, from an outside source. They can't do it for themselves. Like, they don't have their own ability to have their own self-worth. And maybe it's just in that moment. It doesn't mean always, because we've all been in situations or moments where we maybe feel a little out of place, and then you can say or do something, and then they're like, oh. But I do think that it's tied to that. Like, I know a couple influencers, and not all of them, but a couple of them I know don't have the greatest self-esteem, and yet they get 1,000 likes on a post, and that's kind of their goal. Like, that's how they judge a lot in their lives.
But you know what? That's how we judge them as well. And when I say we, I mean the public at large, which is, I think, why sometimes, now, I used to like to tell my story because I thought it was interesting. It's an interesting story, right? And now I find I avoid it like the plague. I did have to tell someone my story. I didn't have to tell them my story. They asked me. We were getting to know each other. It was a lovely conversation. She told me her story, and so I in turn told her mine, and it was the first time in a long time I haven't dreaded telling that story. Like, because for a while I just dreaded. I started to dread.
Which story? I mean, you're a complicated human being.
I know. Well, the whole the whole sex addict story, like, you know what, how I got there, that story is interesting. Like, how I ended up where I ended up initially. You know, I like to say, I start the book with, I'm 31, single, living in Las Vegas, and I'm a virgin, right? That's how the story starts. Divorced. No, see, you have to throw that divorced in, because people are like, virgin and divorce. I'm like, yeah, it's a long story. Very, very long story. But it's a shock value story, right? Like, but it's true. I'm not lying. This is the story, but I could tell it, maybe I could tell it differently where it's not shocking, right? But that's not my style.
I was going to say that's not who you are. And there's something like you are so good at that narrative and being able to, and part of it is keeping like sucking people in
Yeah.
and having it interesting. You want to talk, who the fuck wants to talk to someone who's like, yeah, I was 31, a virgin living in Vegas.
Yeah. It was yeah, but
It's like, okay,
oh, yeah.
you're still going to be like, tell me a little bit more about that. But there's so much more fun to talk to someone with personality. And you have a phenomenal personality. Like
I
you
do
got
have one of those, right? I don't have much, but I got a personality, motherfucker, right? So yeah, I mean, so there's that story, and then the next 10 years I spent having a lot of sex. and a lot of and I'm going to tell you, it's interesting that you should say that. I am 100% willing to tell you it was and still is low self-esteem in that area of my life. Yeah. 100%. I don't have low self-esteem in every area of my life, which I am thankful for.
Yeah.
I mean, very thankful. But there's we're a many faceted human being, right? So yeah, in that area, it isn't low self-esteem, it's basically non-existent self-esteem. And because of that, I have this shock value story. And
like, don't look over here, look over here.
Over
it's
here.
also like a defense mechanism, right?
Oh,
like,
sure it is. Yeah.
I want to share this part of myself with someone.
And I'm flippant about it. And I was flippant about it then. And you think the guy in the elevator is my most crazy story?
No.
And then there's like, oh yeah, I forgot I did do that, didn't I? Right? Like it's all, so yeah. I mean, there's that. Is it a mask? Is it a cover? Is it a facade? Yeah, 100%. Now, it's not, that doesn't make it bad.
No, of course not. Absolutely. No.
It makes it real. And I've learned a lot from it. I am the person I am today. I mean, all of those things still apply. But it's really interesting when I haven't found anybody. Well, no, that's not true. And I'm probably not saying this right. The people that lived through it with me are different than the people that hear the story now, years later, right? It's a different perspective. Yeah, right. It's a different connection. All of those things are different, right? Like the people that lived through it with me, who little did I realize that they were on this really tiny little roller coaster, right?
I just say I'm very honored that I was a part of that journey with you.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm glad you were too. And because look at us now. And we're solving the world's problems together, Freedom. And I think that's awesome. You know what? I care about this planet that we live on. I really care about the people that are on the planet with me, and you specifically. And I want to do what I can, right? It won't be much. I don't cure cancer as much as I really wish I could. Now I'll fund the cure for cancer. Don't miss it. I'll do that, no problem. But I'm not going to be the scientist that figures it out.
Right.
But I'll fund that person. You bet I will. So that's why I'm here, right? That's my purpose. And if it means that I got to tell these shocking stories to people, and shocking and offensive are so closely aligned sometimes that
but yet they're so different.
Yeah. So that's what sometimes I worry. Like my goal isn't to specifically like get out and offend, but if I say, like, I'm gonna have friends that are literally gonna fall off the deep end because I said, oh, I met a guy in an elevator. 7 seconds later, when I got off, he followed me around to say, let's have sex, right? I mean, it's like, okay. What time are you going to be there? So, I do a lot of shock value. Which is funny because, like I said, I do not like Howard Stern.
The ultimate shock jock.
Yeah. And I think it's because it wasn't authentic, which, how stupid is that? Like, what a dumb reason.
You probably just didn't like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with just not liking someone.
I guess so.
Personality, the tone of voice. I mean, there's so much that goes into, and the things that actually comes out of his mouth. Like,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, he was a misogynist. I mean, someone recently played the clip. I don't know why I saw it, but it was when Trump was on and he was talking about his daughter, and Howard Stern was going along. It's like, this is fucking sick. Like, this is fucking sick. You're talking about your own daughter.
And I wouldn't do that, right? Like, I'm not trying to drag someone else into I'm just conveying a story, and I'm conveying it as I would tell a story, right? Like, that's how I'm conveying it.
Yeah.
And sometimes, but I wouldn't walk up to someone and just like say something completely inappropriate.
Just because then I think the difference is, if someone's being offensive, they're literally thinking about the other person and hurting them.
Yeah.
Opposed to, I'm just sharing.
Yeah.
And now what you share, you can't control how somebody feels about that. Right. But if like up front, like, this is possibly going to offend the person, and I'm just going to say it, it's a slippery slope. Like, that's where it's a very gray area, because you're not intentionally trying to hurt them. There's a chance that it will or offend them. But I do think that someone being offended is different than hurting them.
That is exactly, or as you were saying it, I'm like, oh, I'm going to bring up this point. It's a huge difference. Sometimes my presence offends people because they don't like me.
Well, they can fuck right off.
Yeah. See, that might be hurtful, right? I mean, like, but yeah, I mean, people are offended because I wear, and not just me, not Sherry Alexis, but a human being. Like, all people that wear glasses are stupid or ugly or whatever, because people are pieces of shit sometimes, right? So, as a matter of fact, I did look up Terrible Things for Asking the other day, because it's been a long, long time since I've listened to that podcast. And I'm like, is she still on? Because it was a great podcast. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And not only is it still on, but she's got her Instagram, and on there was a photo of a family. And it was a mom and her daughter, and I think her husband and her other two kids, and her one daughter had a very, very, very significant birth defect. And she only lived till she was 10 years old. So it was a very significant birth defect, and it was visible. Like, you could look at this young lady and be like, there's something wrong. And I remember my first thought was, oh my goodness. And then, because I'm human, and then it went away. And then I read the caption, and apparently this woman and her child have been the targets of just assholes on the internet, being like, saying really awful things that are hurtful, right? I mean, I was shocked. Don't get me wrong. Tons of shock value, but also hurtful. Like, your kid should die, or just.
Well, think about this first group that Hitler and the Nazis murdered. It wasn't the Jews; it was the handicapped and disabled.
Right. But what I mean, like, to me, the idea of saying something awful to that family is beyond my comprehension. Even, like, I can't even think of one good reason why.
There are a lot of it.
Yeah, I don't get it. So I'm not that person, right? So I'm thankful. And then I remember thinking, I did go through a whole range of emotions about those people. I have to admit it.
Yeah, I mean, the hypocrisy of people and how awful they can be. Like, I mean, I like Lauren Boebert, like that's when
Oh,
I can't stand these new people in Congress. And I was reading yesterday and I didn't even read the article because I'm like, I'm not giving it a click. I don't want her to, or news organizations to think they put her name in and it's going to cause readership. But I did see the headline and it was Lauren Boebert's going to be a grandmother at 36. And it's like, here's a woman who has literally bashed people online,
yeah.
said horrendous things about people, doesn't believe in sex education, and now it's going to be a grandma at 36 years old and have a teenage son. Like, maybe, I'm sorry, that's like a very stretch in terms of connection. But I just thought about like all the horrendous things she says about people and gays and, like just this, and she's really like, I feel like, I guess that's my point in a long-winded way, is like the people who do those things typically are just horrible people and live like, I don't know, they're just full of shit. And
they're and we talked about this once before, because we talked about the batshit crazy people, and you said they do it for power and whatever, and therein lies another difference. Is for me, oh my God, hello, okay, thank you. For me, I'm honest about it, right? Like I'm trying to keep her from walking on my keyboard about my past and my thought process. And, again, we both know I'm not perfect, right? Because I'm human. No human is. I don't think anybody's perfect, but at least I'm willing to, that girl I was 100% wrong about, I'm willing to admit it. And I think so. Your Boebert girl, I know who we are. I just don't like her either. I wonder if at one moment she's like, "Wow, I was wrong." How would we accept that from her?
fine. I would be like, great.
Don't do it again. Don't do it again. Right?
Or just like share your epiphany with others. Like, you have clearly had influence on other people or whatever. Like, yeah, I don't think there's an issue.
That reminds me, I was listening to a podcast. This was on one of my drives to California, and it was, it's This American Life. So it was literally talking people into getting the COVID vaccine, and they had this focus group, and there was this guy that his job in politics is to talk people into things, and he was able to talk people into a lot of different things. So they hired him to see if they could talk this group into getting the COVID vaccine. It was an amazing This American Life episode. And in the end, do you know what worked? The governor, Christie. Who's he the governor of? Say it again.
Chris Christie?
What's he the governor of?
He was the governor of New Jersey.
Yes, that's him. He was anti-vaccine. And then his administration got it, right? His group, and like two of them died.
Yeah, from Trump. That was the crazy part. It was Trump that, yes.
And he was like, damn it, I'm getting the vaccine. I mean, and he was willing to, I was the one moment when I was able to tolerate that man, right? And I said, good on you. He was like, I was wrong. And I'm like, didn't it feel good? Doesn't it feel good to be like, I was wrong. Here's why I was wrong. Not going to do it again.
Done deal.
Yeah. All right. So shock value, my friend, it's never going to stop from me. I'm still going to do it.
I say keep doing it.
And I am going to offend people because I am offensive, apparently. But it is never my goal to hurt anyone, like intentionally. So,
and if someone's offended, that is on them. they have to look at themselves of why they were offended.
Yeah. I've
That's
offended a few religious people for sure.